Howdy folks, Bluesboyjag here with yet another walking cigar box guitar lesson. Ooh, we got some duckies. A little bit chilly today, but not too bad. So today, I thought I would talk about 3-string versus 4-string cigar box guitars. And the question is a 3-string easier to play or easier to learn than a 4-string? So let's talk about the differences between the two. So 3-string cigar box guitar has the same scales as a 4-string, which means that you can play the same pentatonic scales and blues scales and major scales, which kind of doesn't make a lot of sense to some people because, well, how can you play the same scales on a 3 and a 4? But we won't get into all that, but basically you can play the same scales. You just have a little bit more limitation on a 3-string. But you can do more on a 4 simply because you've got more strings. And more strings means more chords. And more strings means more varied melodies. And maybe a fuller sound because you have more notes in your chords because you have more strings. But does it make it easier to play a 3 versus a 4? Because 3 strings would seem to be easier. You don't have to worry about that 4th string. But in reality, 3 strings are much more difficult because if you want to play a minor chord, for instance, it's kind of difficult on a 3-string. 7th chord is not so difficult on a 3-string. But if you're playing a song that has, well, let's just say fancy chords in it from a regular 6-string guitar, a lot of those chords, not all of them, but a lot of them are difficult to play on a 3-string. So you can kind of approximate those chords, but sometimes you can't really get the same effect. How's that right there? That way you see the water behind me. Kind of tranquil, right? So your 3-string cigar box guitar, you can play your typical major chords pretty easy with one finger. And you can play some minor chords. But on a 4-string, you can play a lot more minor chords, and you can play a lot more 7th chords, for instance. And generally speaking, most simple songs like country, pop, and rock have maybe a 7th, and maybe a minor, and maybe a minor 7th chord, and of course your major chord. So the limitation for a 3-string is that you have to stretch your fingers farther to play a lot of those chords, which sometimes is doable depending on the chord, and sometimes it's not. So when I started playing cigar box guitar, I had been playing an open-tuned 6-string open G regular guitar for several years, and I didn't play cigar box guitars for 6 years, I guess, after I got deep into the blues. I got into the blues in 1998, and I played rock and roll and country and pop for several years before that. So 1979 is when I started taking guitar lessons, and I started playing in a band in 1980. So I had a lot of experience playing those classic rock songs, and I knew the different fingerings of a minor chord in a 7th and a major 7th and a minor 7th and all that stuff. I knew some jazz chords, and so my facilitation was pretty good, so I could jump around on the fretboard of a 6-string pretty well. So not that I was a fantastic guitar player, I still don't think I'm a fantastic guitar player, but I digress. So when I started playing the cigar box guitar, I Two, as many people do, assume a 3-string is going to be easier. Well, I learned over the years that whenever I try something new, I should try the easy way first. I would try the instead of like building a rocket ship, I would build a, I don't know, maybe a rocket engine. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but instead of building the whole airplane, in other words, I would maybe do a model airplane, and then I would do another fancier airplane that had a radio control set up in it or whatever. So I learned that I had to take it one step at a time. And so when I started playing cigar box guitar and started making them and experimenting with them, I started with the 3-string. And I very quickly, like within an hour of playing one, figured out that a lot of those chords were not doable on the 3-string. So eventually I figured out different fingerings, and I kind of messed around with the 4-string and played some of the classic rock songs that I had already been playing for years on the 4-string. And that just took a few minutes to figure those out, because that was an open G, which means Keith Richards tuning. So I was familiar with that. So when I started to play more, fancier songs with minor chords and minor 7th chords and that sort of thing, I realized that you couldn't really do a lot of those chords on a 3-string. You can kind of approximate them, but they're kind of what I call ambiguous chords, because they're not major or minor, and sometimes they weren't 7ths. They would suffice for a, quote, fill-in chord. In other words, if you wanted a nice, thick, juicy hamburger patty with barbecue, and you wanted the cheese and all the onions and the ketchup and mustard and everything on it, and you wanted to use your favorite bun, but let's say the stores were closed and the only stores that were open were the 7-Elevens, well, you could use a cheap bun and a cheap, maybe not so tasty burger. Well, that's what I was doing. I was trying to figure out how to make these chords sound good on a 3-string. And sometimes they work, like I said, sometimes they didn't. So I experimented on a 6-string because I had been playing open tune 6-string periodically, and I kind of compared the two. So I had my 6-string sitting next to me, and I had my 3-string CBG sitting next to me. So I'd play the chord on the 6-string, and then I'd put it down and pick up the 3-string and see if I could approximate that same chord. And I learned within about 90 seconds that a lot of them you can approximate, but they don't have the same sound. So if you have a song, for instance, it goes from a G to a C to a D, and your turnaround goes up to a D7, sometimes I could figure that out. Sometimes I could, depending on the key, and sometimes I couldn't. So really, the key is experimentation and trying different fingerings for different chords. And I figured out within half an hour or so of trying different songs and different chords that a lot of those chords you couldn't really play on a 3. They sounded like a regular D chord, for instance, instead of a D minor, or they sounded like a D instead of a D7. And yeah, you can sort of kind of use those chords on some songs. So I kind of concentrated at that point on a 4-string. And lo and behold, I learned 10 or 15 songs in a day or two on the 4-string, not because I'm amazing, but because I had been playing a lot of those same chords on a 6-string. Even though it was open tuned, but I was familiar with that on the 6-string. And so at that point, I pretty much abandoned the 3-string until I started doing my channel, and people were requesting a lot of lessons for the 3-string. And I sat down and I figured out a lot of those chords, or approximations of those chords. Is that the right word? Approximation? Yeah. And so I've come to the conclusion that yes, you can play some of those chords and some of those songs. You just have to have the knowledge of the different notes and keys and scales, and you can figure it out at that point. You know, you can experiment with different fingerings, and you can play approximations of some of those chords. But the 4-string is much more versatile in the long run, and I've talked about this on my channel before, and I get a lot of emails from people asking, can you make that 4-string lesson that you did, can you make the same lesson on a 3? Because they started on a 3 and they're familiar with the 3, and most people start on a 3 because they think it's going to be easier. And yes, I could do those lessons for you, but you'll be a little bit disappointed, because instead of hearing a minor chord, you're probably going to hear a 2-string bar chord, which will get you by, but it just doesn't have the same sound. So I learned over time that sometimes I'm surprised, though, because I might learn a song and I would hear the original version of the classic rock song that I'm trying to learn, and I would say to myself, that's not going to work on a 3. That's going to be, it's not going to sound right. And once I plug in the 3 and start playing, it sounds great. And I've learned dozens and dozens of chords using my pinky to go on the 1st string and stretch up farther. The other thing is you're going to be jumping around a lot on the 3-string on some songs. Some other songs, not so much. So you might jump from the 2nd fret to the 6th or 8th or 10th fret, which means, depending on the tempo of the song, that may or may not be doable. In other words, it's hard to jump up that far in one beat and hit that next chord perfectly. So, long story short, the 4-string is much more versatile because you don't have to stretch your fingers as far, and you don't have to jump up and down the neck as far to jump to chords. Your chords are generally going to be in the same vicinity, just like they are on the 6-string. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason that there's 6 strings on a 6-string guitar. You don't have to stretch your fingers as far, and you don't have to jump up and down the neck as much to hit those chords. Now, having said all that, I'm the sort of person who always starts out simple, and then I move on from there, and I get fancier and fancier, slowly but surely. Don't call me Shirley. That's just me, though. Other people, they dive right in at 8th grade, right? They don't even go kindergarten through 5th, 6th, 7th grade, right? They just jump right in, and they're just fine with that. Well, that does, for some people, that works fine, and it does work. In my case, though, it didn't. So I figured that the 3-string cigar box guitar was going to be difficult on some songs, and as I learned some of those, or tried to learn them, I decided I'm going to go ahead and play the 4-string, because those chords are easily attained. You don't have to jump around as much on the fretboard. So bottom line is, it kind of depends on how much time you want to put into it, and how much time you want to practice, and how long it takes to write down the chord charts. A lot of those chord charts are for minors and 7ths and major 7ths and that sort of thing, are a little bit tricky, but ear training is important too. So the more songs you learn on whatever, a 6-string or a 3-string or a 4-string, the better your ear is going to be. So my advice is to play as many songs, learn as many songs as you can, and experiment with those songs and try different versions of the chords. Look up on the internet. There's tons and tons of resources on the internet nowadays for cigar box guitars. When I started, not so much. There was nothing. So get on the internet. If you learn some songs and it's hard to jump around on the fretboard because you've only got 3 strings, pull up some chord charts, and you'll find a lot of people have contributed to the cause by posting a lot of different versions of these 3-string chords and 4-string chords. So you can pick and choose the ones that will work best for you, given the song you're learning and the key that you're in. And I think you'll find that you will be able to learn a lot of these songs. You just have to jump around a lot on a 3-string. You may not be able to play, in fact, you won't be able to play, I can tell you definitively, a lot of those chords. Because let's say the song is kind of fast and you need to play a quick minor chord. Well, the 3-string, it's going to be tough depending on the chord you're trying to make. So I would say start out with a 4. Even though there's more strings, it doesn't mean it's more difficult. You can play the same 1-finger, 2-finger chords on a 4-string as you can on a 3. So if you want to start out simple, start out on the 4 and play the 1 or 2-finger chords. Do that for a week or 2 or maybe a month and experiment. Then go to the 3 and experiment, learn some songs. And you'll start, over time, you'll start to see the differences. And you'll know right off the bat when you hear a song that you want to learn, you'll know right off the bat whether or not it's going to work on a 3-string or a 4-string. I don't know if this helps or not, but it's fun to do it on both strings. It's fun to play songs on both a 4-string and a 3-string. So don't cross one of those out forever, a 3 or a 4. Use both. You'll find that you'll learn a whole lot if you have a 3-string and a 4-string. People think, well, I'll learn more on a 4. Well, yes and no. On a 3, like I said, you'll be stretching your fingers to get that 7th chord or the 9th chord or whatever it is. And so it'll be easy on the 4, but it'll be difficult maybe, and you'll be kind of looking for different inversions up and down the neck. But believe me, on the 3-string, there are enough strings and enough frets to make tons of inversion chords. What does that mean? Well, virtually every chord you could make more than one way. So it may have a low G instead of a high G in it, or vice versa. It might be a high-pitched minor chord instead of a low-pitched minor chord, but it's still going to be the proper minor chord or the proper 7th chord or whatever the chord is. So I would say if you're nervous about it or you're having some trouble with the 3-string, getting those chords, learn them on a 4, figure out what they are, get on the internet, look at the chord charts, practice those chords on the 4. You'll be surprised how quick you can play a bunch of those songs. So don't think of it as, one's better than the other, and there is a definitive answer that 3 strings are better or easier or 4 strings are better because they're more capable. It really comes down to your preference, how much time you want to put into it. If you want the song to sound exactly like the original or as much like the original song that you're covering, a 4 is probably going to, most of the time, be the best. But if you just want to jam and have some fun and don't sweat about practicing and get frustrated, then I think a 3 is probably going to work better in that context. So, like I said, your mileage may vary depending on your experience. So have fun, keep on practicing, keep on learning songs. One last thing, you don't need to learn the whole song in 10 minutes. A lot of people are email me and they're frustrated learning the song, so I tell them, just learn the main riff, or learn your favorite part of the song, or maybe just half of your favorite part of the song. Just a couple of little riffs that take 10 or 15 seconds of the song. That was enough to get me going when I started playing 6-string, and it should be enough to get you going to play a 3-string or a 4-string. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and stay warm. It's going to get down to the teens tonight here in North Little Rock, Arkansas, which is not altogether unusual, but people around here tend to freak out. We did have some serious cold a couple years ago where a lot of pipes burst But generally speaking, pipes aren't going to burst at, 15 degrees, 20 degrees. They're going to burst at 0, more than likely. So I'm not too worried about that with my house, knock on wood. So y'all have a good one, and we'll see you next time.